All About Writing with Ben and Sara.
Welcome to All About Writing, the podcast that covers everything about the world of writing from the inside out. This is episode 32, part 4 on our series on screenwriting. I'm Ben, here with my co-host Sara, who is an award-winning best-selling author, screenwriter, editor, and TED Talk presenter.
And I am Sara, here with my co-host Ben, who is an award-winning best-selling author and ghostwriter, editor, and publisher. And joining us today is my very good friend, Tim Boissey, who is my guru when it comes to ideas and how to maneuver in the Hollywood sphere. And I would love for you to tell everybody a little bit about yourself, and then we'll dive into our questions all about TV pilot writing today.
Hi, I'm Tim Boissey, and see a little bit about myself. So currently I'm in Los Angeles, and I'm a screenwriter, and I do some television writing from time to time. I also work in the commercial field, so I produce television commercials, and that also involves a little bit of writing as well. I've been out here for about 20 years, and I started at the bottom and worked my way up to this position where I am now, producing commercials and films and writing films and directing as well.
Fabulous. By the way, are we all hearing that echo? I'm going to pause us because are you hearing it, Tim? It sounds like fuzz. Okay. I should be able to clear it out on the back end. I'll just delete this part of our conversation. Okay. So Tim, I know that you and I have worked together on a lot of projects, from features and shorts and everything like that. But I would love you to kind of give our listeners, who know very little, most of them know very little about working in the industry, especially in TV. And I know commercials are kind of like mini pilots in a way, but could you give everybody what your opinion is of what is the structure of a pilot script, like length, acts, anything like that, that is just some basic overview so they don't have to read the book this thick on how to write a TV pilot?
Yeah, sure. So if you're writing a TV pilot, it depends on first, like what's your format, if you're going to be a half hour or an hour. If you're a half hour format, your pilots typically are 30 to 45 pages, a page being usually a minute of screen time. You can kind of bank on that, 1 page per minute. So a half hour script is 30 pages. The pilot's usually a first episode plus kind of story. So 30 to 45 pages on a half hour. And then on a 1 hour like drama or action or something like that, which you see on HBO, those first pilot episodes are usually anywhere from an hour to 90 minutes, so 60 to 90 pages for the longer ones.
I guess I didn't realize we could do pilots that were 90 pages. I feel like that's a feature. No?
It is a feature length, yeah. It's a lot more common now, especially in miniseries, to have the feature length episodes.
Oh, so for TV miniseries, like if it's like a limited series, you're saying it's more common to see a little bit longer running?
Yeah, I think these are just comparable ones.
All right.
Can you hear us okay?
Can you hear us?
Also, guys. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
All right. Sorry about that.
No, it's okay.
Right.
It'll all cut out. It's really easy to do the cutting.
Okay. Your question was about the length of
Miniseries.
for miniseries.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, it's much more common nowadays for those to be, feature length, which is typically 90 minutes per episode. And really, you can just go anywhere from 60 to 90 minutes. You're an hour and 10, hour and 20, all the way up to an hour and a half. Even some finales tend to go push it to like an hour 45, 2 hours for like a finale for a miniseries. And that was really like a trend that came about after Game of Thrones.
Have you found that the streaming has changed the way that pilots are written a lot? Like there used to be for network TV a very set formula for timing, but now with streaming, there's a lot more flexibility with time. Have you found there's been a big change?
Yeah, I'd say writing now for series is closer to writing for a feature where you don't have to keep in mind commercial breaks and because those are like emotional breaks in an episode. Usually those are points you're trying to hit at like 5 page, let's say, 8. You need to have a certain character arc and an emotional beat before you go to the first 2-minute commercial break, and then you come back, and usually you're coming back on. You kind of are leaving on a hook, and you're coming back on the button.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes total sense. And so nowadays, with so much streaming, do you find that the proportion of screenplays being written is much higher for streaming, or is it still quite high for network TV?
It's probably lower in the network now, just because streaming is a larger product. There's more offered on streaming now than there are for networks. There's probably I don't even know. There's only maybe a dozen networks left on television that have commercial, and everybody else wants to go to streaming.
Yeah.
Except now that streamers, they're doing commercials.
Yeah, exactly. And that's probably something that will be figured out in like the writer's algorithm is like when those commercials are happening. Because right now if you're watching something and you're getting ads in it, it's like in the middle of like an awkward moment. And it's just like, oh, well, that just totally took me out of everything because I wasn't even paying attention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I noticed that with the kids watching stuff on streaming. I was like, commercial, what? Like it sometimes in the middle of a scene or a sentence. Just bizarre.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if someone was looking to try to get into the industry now, like you said at the beginning, you start at the bottom and worked your way up. I think that's for setting expectations for anyone looking to get into screenwriting. You're going to be starting at the bottom, like no matter who you are, you're coming in. What does that look like? How does someone go about starting to get into the business of writing TV pilots?
The short answer is festivals.
Okay.
You learn how to write in the correct format, and then you just write either a pilot or a spec. Well, let's talk about specs in a minute. You either write like a pilot or a feature or a short film, and you put the scripts into competitions, and the competitions can vary from you just get an award, like a ribbon with a gold medal, or you could win an opportunity to have a meeting with a manager or an agent or a studio executive. And that's most typically the way in. The other way in would be to write a spec and submit it to the network or the streaming platform that owns the rights.
And so by spec, you mean just writing a script that you're not getting paid for. It's speculative, I think is what spec stands for.
Yeah, not getting paid for, and something that like is already something that a property they already own. So if you write a spec episode of the new Dexter series, or you can write a Superman feature. You can't do anything with either of them. You can't even really use those for competitions, but you can send them to the people that own the rights and say, hey, look what I can do. And those can lead to opportunities like internships or assistantships. or just a job.
That's really interesting. I've never actually really thought about specs that way.
Yeah, me
So
either.
yeah, that's neat. So if I do really love a franchise or an IP, I can just take a shot at it and fire it off. That's neat. Huh.
Yeah,
I won't get sued
absolutely.
for that. Awesome.
Yeah.
Ben is gonna write a Star Wars pilot now.
And look, if you're good at it, um, and they don't want it and they're not interested, then you can just do what 50 Shades of Grey kind of did with the Twilight series, like the original version of the 50 Shades of Grey was like a BDSM Twilight, and they wouldn't give them the rights to the characters, so they just turned it into 50 Shades of Grey. So,
Yeah, cool. Huh. Well, that's neat. I'm sort of churning over that one. Wow. Ooh, the opportunities. That's awesome. That's fun.
So I was gonna have you talk a little bit about because we've covered like structure of what the pages should look like and things like that. But to me, pilots are trickier because you have to do arcs inside of them. Can you talk about, from a writing point of view, what kind of when we say each pilot needs to, each or episode even needs to have an arc within it, what does that look like? How is that configured into the whole series? If people are just trying to write their first pilot, like, you don't shove everything in, but you want it interesting enough. You want character development to be set up or, moving. Can you talk about some of those like pieces of the pilot that need to be there to do a good job?
okay, yeah, to do a good job. And I think it varies from project to project and writer to writer. It's a style thing. I think for me, what would be like what's sellable, what you see in most pilots is your major protagonists and antagonists, their sort of defining characteristic being tested, and how they overcome that obstacle in the first episode. And it's not the series, test for them. It's just their major emotional component test, right? So if your major protagonist is a detective who is very sensitive, then in that pilot you really exploit that. You just rip the scab off of the sensitivity and just show how sensitive he is and how he overcomes that in the first episode.
Mm-hmm.
And it could have nothing to do with where the series arc is going to be. It's just about them. And you do the same thing. You pay the same amount of detail and attention to your antagonist and all of your major characters. They all need to have their own emotional arcs in a pilot so you can be invested in these characters, big or small, but they typically tend to be their major emotional characteristic.
Now, when it comes to characters, that's interesting because some TV shows can have a lot of characters in them. Do you have to introduce all the major characters in the pilot? Is that sort of one of the necessary things?
No, I don't think so. I mean, major characters shift, and especially now with like the way ratings are handled, and the zeitgeist will let you know if they want a character killed or if they want somebody to come back and see more. So you go with the flow on that,
Right.
as far as that goes. Yeah, I think I think you've got to be fluid with it.
I think that's an interesting thing to bring up too for anyone who wants to talk about TV writing is, we come in as writers with this idea of this grand scheme of here's what the whole series is going to be. And we might find out in the writer's room or, after season 1 that all the plans for season 2 or 3 might go out the window, which blows my mind. I know it's not a new concept. I mean, if you go back, to the 90s or what, when like Family Matters was out and like Urkel was supposed to be like a one-time neighbor, like one-off character, and he ended up becoming this major popular thing because he was so popular. So, and that was like kind of done on the fly too. So like, I get that it's not a new concept, but it's not how people talk about oh, you have to write a pilot, you have to come up with a TV series idea, you have to come to the table with the whole series figured out or the arc of the whole first season or whatever, and then you're going to learn halfway through, maybe even writing, like you're going to have to change everything. So it's that, you know, how, when you say writers have to be fluid, do you mean, I want you to expound a little bit on that, I guess.
Yeah. So if you're doing multiple seasons, your major characters are going to, I would say, not so much shift, but the grouping will grow, right? If you're doing multiple seasons, your first season, most certainly you should do your best job to introduce all of the major characters into that pilot episode with, their characteristics and their emotional arcs. And then, yeah, you should do your best job doing that. When I say you need to be fluid about how you do it, I guess what I mean is across a multiple season type of show. You know where you're going when you get multiple seasons. Typically, like in season 1, this happens and it ends like this, and then we start in season 2 like this, and we go to here, and then 3, etc., etc. So you need to like sort of pick and choose when you get into like your further seasons when you're going to start introducing other major characters to mesh with the first group that you've already established. I'd say like a good example would maybe be like The Sopranos. There was always kind of Tony and the gang, but the gang, was some of those guys were killed off and replaced by newer major characters that came on in later seasons. But those guys were, already developed characters that the writers knew were going to come in at some point in the season and hit like these major points. It was just about when it happened and how it happened. Because again, like if you're doing multiple seasons, even multiple episodes, and you're listening to your viewers' response and trying to do the best job with appeasing your audience, then you've got to, pick and choose when you might lose a character, when you might expand upon a character, when you might want to bring in a major character for the confrontation they're going to have earlier or later.
Mm-hmm. Now, this is interesting. I know we're supposed to be talking about pilots here, but you said something really interesting about the series, which is how you respond to the audience. And I've often heard about how TV series, the writers are frantically laying the tracks down in front of the train. Like the series is already rolling, the season is already rolling, and they're still filming later episodes in the season. Is that because they just want to wait to see reaction before they actually write the later scripts in the season, or is it that important? Like, do you have a whole season kind of put together, and then you adapt for the second season, or are you actually making it up as you go that fast?
That first season will be put together, but then it's a combination. It'll be put together, and they have an idea of like what they like and where they want to go as far as like the traditional storytelling that writers like to do. And then as it's happening in real time, we now have the ability to respond to an audience and react and rewrite and try to boost that audience, because I mean that's kind of what we want at the end of the day as any writer, television or film, is an audience. The bigger the better.
So on the topic of the planning out the whole season, when you write a pilot, and like say you're going to do a spec, you're going to send in something, are you expected to also produce like a little series Bible and a series outline? Is that sort of part of it, or can you just do the screenplay?
I'd say it's expected if you're trying to sell it. Because the question for selling a pilot is kind of the same question for selling a film. It's like, okay, what else do you have? They're like, oh gosh, I like this pilot, but where does this go? And if you're like, oh, I haven't really expanded upon it, I just thought that far, the reaction is probably going to be like, oh, all right, well, we don't want to be responsible for carrying it to the end because we kind of rely on you, the writer, to do that. Or they take it and it turns into something that you never wanted it to be, but you don't have any control over that because they'll just take it from you. If your pilot's that good, yeah. Typically it's expected to have the pilot and then the rest of the season sort of mapped out and all the characters that are going to be introduced.
Yep. No, that makes sense. It makes total sense. And as a writer, I definitely like that. I definitely would want to think beyond just the first episode. I would hope that I have a sense of where it's going. So, but it's good to know because I know dealing with Hollywood is a very different process than working as a book author.
Yeah, and I mean for that, I would also recommend to any writer then who thinks maybe they're more comfortable with mapping out the whole thing versus getting into a situation where they have to kind of make it up as they go. And what's good for every single writer is to just go out, find your local improv group or improv class and take improvisation classes. Grow your improvisational skills. Doing that is just not only beneficial for your life and public self, but it helps you creatively as a writer just fire on different cylinders. The improv cylinders, it's a different one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's it. That's good. Do you do that?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that about you.
I love it.
No, I think I would love to kind of, because we try and keep these short so that they're not so overwhelming with information, but I'd love to kind of wrap up with my last question about pilots. Is that if you could leave budding writers or writers who've been writing books and wanting to get into writing for TV with any kind of your golden nugget of knowledge or one piece of advice going into the industry, what would that look like or sound like? What would you say to someone who's like, I've always wanted to write for TV? What advice would you give them?
Get an internship.
Okay.
Get an internship. Start at the bottom. Don't ever stop writing, but get your foot in the door. And the best way to do that and to learn is by getting an internship. Get an internship at a studio or a network or your local news station. Just get an internship as a writer and start building your resume.
Is that something that has to be done generally in person, or nowadays with all the technology we have like this, can you be an intern and not be in LA or in Atlanta or wherever it is the studio is?
Probably not. Probably not. An intern is going to be somebody that's going to be there, boots on the ground, still doing some of the physical things that need to be done around the office. It's it's not glamorous, but you have to make the most of it as an artist. That part of us that has to be social and make connections. That's the part of that you have to do. Yeah. And you got to be there for it. It's not. I've never really seen a remote internship. I don't know what that would look like. I
have trouble imagining it myself, but you never know. You never know. It is the 21st century. So.
Or are you going to bring coffee? If you're.
You can't really run to the printer at your house and give it to the person on the Zoom. We haven't done that yet.
Yeah, true. Cool. All right. Well, we'll leave it at that. How do you deliver coffee remotely? So we'll leave that for another time.
There we go.
But Tim, thanks so much for being with us today. That's our show for everyone today. Tim, if anyone would like to find out what you do and where you're at, where can they find you?
I am not on any social media. They can find me. Oh gosh, I don't know.
LinkedIn.
Yeah, they can. Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me. I don't know. Like when my managers post something, that's where you can find me. I'm not a public facing figure.
No worries. Listeners, you can find Tim here at All About Writing with Ben and Sara.
Yeah.
There.
We want to take that back and I'll just say that.
Yeah, that works great.
All right, well, that's our show for today. Everyone, thanks so much for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on any of our chats, and feel free to leave a review because it really does help us a lot. If anyone is looking for help with any aspect of their writing, we recommend our friends at Cascadia Author Services. You can find them at cascadiaauthorservices.com. And you can catch up with Sarah at sarahdaman.com and on Instagram.
And you can find Ben at bennettmircoles.com as well as Facebook and Instagram. Thank you again for joining us today. Please reach out if there's any topics about screenwriting or more you want us to cover, and we'll see you again when we next chat all about writing.
This has been All About Writing with Ben and Sara.